Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're discussing the ties of the Raven, with the unique ties of successor chapters to the first founding. General spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from across the Warhammer 40k universe. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So earlier this week, we discussed the aid and assistance the Black Templars provided to the Celestial Lions. As fellow Sons of Dawn, the Templars felt a fierce desire to help their cousin chapter, and a rage at the injustice that had been done to them. And throughout the Imperium, we've seen the bonds and ties the shared bloodlines can offer. Some instinctive rivalries, others close relations of cooperation, sometimes even complete abandonment and isolation. And of course, this link all stems from the heritage of their Primarch and founding chapter. A patronage and link that sees the same varied relations as amongst the successors themselves, and maybe even more so, for the weight of history lies heavy on the first founding. For though technically they became chapters at the same time as the second founding chapters, their names bear the weight of history alone. They carry the mantle of the legions. Through them, their names echo from the Great Crusade itself. And well, it's this interesting relationship I wanted to discuss today, as there was one particular moment I came across not too long ago that really stuck out to me on just how different and surprising some bloodlines' ties with their parent chapter can be. It wasn't a long moment by any stretch of the imagination, in fact just a few brief short lines. However, for me it was really telling. And that moment in particular came from the story Deathwatch by Steve Parker. And while maybe a little surprising at first to be discussing relations within Primarch bloodlines within the Deathwatch, when you actually think about it, it's surprising we don't see more of it, given the sheer breadth of chapters paying their tithes to the Deathwatch chapter. Hopefully it's something we can see more of in the future, as I personally find these interactions very interesting. As a side note, there's a tiny moment I'll always remember, when two mortifactors within the Deathwatch notice each other from across a loading bay, and they just take a moment to give each other a salute. Same chapter, but I don't know, I just like those kind of little moments. It's what makes the lore feel more real and alive in a way. However, anyway, I digress. Back to the particular moment in question for this discussion. Again, while small, it was quite revealing for me, as it involved the bloodline of Corax. A bloodline who, if you had to name or pick one to be the most isolated and withdrawn, who would most likely shun relations with other chapters, well, I'm pretty sure most people would pick the Raven Guard. Yet here, as a successor chapter encountered a Raven Guard within the Deathwatch, as the two sat down for food, it was revealed far from spurn contact with their fellow bloodline chapters, there is actually a good deal of fraternity and respect given to the Raven Guard heritage, and returned in kind. The black-haired battle brother shoveled a spoonful of thick, sludgy gruel into his mouth. You'd think they could add some flavour to the damned stuff, he groaned. Then, after another swallow, he added, "We share blood, you and I." Karras nodded. The colourless skin was a giveaway. Gene seed mutation. Another reason certain others kept their distance. It would seem so. Raptors, perhaps? Revilers? The other tutted. Now why would you think that? Ravengard, I'll have you know. Karas cursed. Given the stranger's breezy manner, how could he possibly have guessed it? He dropped his spoon in his bowl and stood. Dutifully, and in accordance with ancient tradition, he raised right hand to left pectoral, bowed his head, and intoned gravely, "We look to Corax and pray for his return. We of the Death Spectres honour the seed that made us." The Ravengard's smile weakened for a moment. He gestured for Karas to sit. A few others in the refectorum looked over. "We honour the brothers born of our roots," he replied. "May Corax take pride in them and all they do." It was appropriate in response, but not so much in the way it was said. "Relax, brother. I don't stand much on formality. You've obeyed the forms. Let us put them aside where they belong." Now again, this was a really short interaction, but I really enjoyed it for what it represented. Because for me, it really revealed an interesting layer to the Ravengard's relations that we've never really seen before. Firstly, the easy banter between the two, approaching the clear topic of sharing bloodline, which would be pretty easy to tell for the Ravengard out of all the bloodlines out there, due to the pale white skin and black eyes of their Primarch Corax. And there was a clear fraternity there, no bitterness that can sometimes be seen within some lineages. There was no hesitancy in the Death Spectre as he was guessing who his fellow bloodline member might be. And so that implies there's no bad relations or particularly negative answers the other bloodline member could have given. There wasn't a chapter he could have said that would have had the Death Spectre being unhappy with to hear. And particularly then, as soon as the Death Spectre heard he was actually a Ravengard, his forebear legion/chapter, how he instantly then cursed himself for not realising and immediately stood to perform a traditional salute of honour that he should have already given. Karas cursed. Given the stranger's breezy manner, how could he have possibly have guessed it? He dropped his spoon in his bowl and stood dutifully. And in accordance with ancient tradition, he raised right hand to left pectoral, bowed his head and intoned gravely, "We look to Corax and pray for his return. We of the Death Spectres honour the seed that made us." It's such a subtle thing, but that curse at the mention of Ravengard really reveals just how much respect there is there. How the Death Spectre chastises himself for not having performed the tradition already. Even though he didn't know, there was really no way of him being able to tell which chapter the other one was. Yet still he chastises himself. It's a real mark of respect. And again, something great to see within the Ravengard bloodline. A bloodline you don't often get to see this kind of behaviour from. Here, in Deathwatch service away from their chapters, in a communal eating area, the Death Spectre still feels the need to honour his founding chapter, even when the Ravengard clearly felt he didn't have to. The guessing beforehand, raptors, revilers, fellow successors, but the second that Ravengard name was uttered, the whole interaction took on a whole nother level of reverence almost. That there was a respect there that had to be shown. A position in their lineage that had to be acknowledged. And the respect is a two-way street as well. The Ravengard clearly having an established salute in return. We honour the brothers born of our roots. May Corax take pride in them and all they do. This is the kind of relationship and respect I think Corax would undoubtedly be proud of. And it's very interesting to consider how many first founding chapters don't have this manner or tradition with many of their own successors. Before the event of Devastation of Baal, for example, Gabriel Seth, chapter master of the Flesh Tearers, held the Blood Angels in little more than disdain, and at first voiced his opinion that the Blood Angels should be allowed to die out, finding it laughable that Dante thought he could summon all the chapters of the blood. In fact, Dante really had to make it clear it was an appeal and request, not an expectation. And it could be said it was only Seth being eventually won over to Dante's cause that really laid the path for many of the successors to join with Dante and their parent chapter. Although this is a brief interaction here, with this kind of tradition and respect within Corax's lineage, I personally wouldn't be surprised to see the Raven Guard having a far easier time of calling for aid if they needed to. Again, admittedly, this is only one interaction between a single successor chapter and their founder. But I don't know, for me, this feels like this is far more likely to be consistent between many, if not most, of the Raven Guard and their successors. The Raven Guard response of tradition in particular just kind of makes it feel more established in a way, that the honouring brothers born of their roots is something that could be said to all of their successors. And despite surprising to see this encounter, it does feel like something the Raven Guard would do. Now, another comparison that springs to mind is when Uriel Ventris visited the Mortifactors' homeworld, the Mortifactors being an Ultramarine successor. And this was in his quest to ask for their aid in fighting the Tyranids at Tarsis Ultra, a world that Guilliman himself had sworn for his bloodline to always defend. And bearing in mind Uriel was captain of the 4th Company, there was only a single chaplain sent to greet his delegation, which in itself is hardly a warm welcome. And the interaction between Uriel and the Mortifactors chapter master, Magyar, was tense to say the least, despite recognising their kinship of blood. And rather than assisting Uriel through loyalty to the Ultramarines themselves, Magyar only really agreed to send forces to Tarsis Ultra due to the warrior's debt Guilliman himself vowed to the world, feeling honour-bound by Guilliman, not to the Ultramarines. And Uriel had to perform a Mortifactor tradition of drinking their blood, something that disgusted him, before Magyar would accept his request, which was quite clearly a test on Magyar's part. So it's a good example of how even the more famed and renowned chapters, such as the Ultramarines, don't necessarily have as good relations with all their successors, or at least haven't previously, because it's a very different thing in respecting their Primarch and the chapter that bears the Legion's name. Many second founding chapters see themselves as no different to the first founding, having been founded themselves by members of the original Legion. And really, they're not wrong. In many ways, they should be just as revered as their first founding kin. Maybe in a funny way, the relations within chapter bloodlines, founders and successors, is the 40k equivalent of the Primarch's relationships. Whereas the Primarchs previously saw their kin as true brothers, with the modern day chapters, that's not really as prevalent, and really has been replaced by those relations within their own bloodlines. And I guess maybe that's why we see such a mixture and varied set of relations and interactions, because it represents all the trials and tribulations of brothers across the centuries. However, one thing's for sure, if the respect between the Death Spectres and the Raven Guard is anything to go by, the ties of the Raven will be hard to match. But as always everyone, what do you think? Are you surprised to see such a tight, honour-bound level of respect between a Raven Guard successor and the founding chapter? Of all the bloodlines, would you perhaps more have expected to see this kind of thing from, say, the Ultramarines? And is this something like me you could see and probably expect to be a lot more widespread within the Raven Guard lineage? That their bloodline is traditionally a respectful one if introverted. Considering the strong ties we discussed earlier in the week between the Templars and Celestial Lions, would you place the relations between the Sons of Dawn as possibly the strongest? Or the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, the Ultramarines, or considering the Sons of the Blood were able to put their differences aside to defend Baal, do you feel they have assumed that mantle? Considering the Space Wolves are fairly new to Successors, and it's yet to be proven if the curse of their bloodline won't come back to play once again, I'm not sure they can be considered just yet. For me, I think you'd honestly be hard-pressed to beat the relations between the Sons of Dawn. They do seem to have held to their connection, despite their differences, pretty well over the years. But again, I just really enjoyed seeing that mark of respect that exists within Corax's line. As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. With that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.